Good evening. Welcome to the Community Awareness Committee's monthly panel discussion. Our topic this evening is gang activity. I am Trish Steiner, Chair of the Community Awareness Committee. We are a committee of the Neighborhood Safety Commission. The Neighborhood Safety Commission is comprised of individuals appointed by the chairman and the district commissioners. We welcome you and thank you for attending this evening and for those of you who are watching on Channel 23. Our committee members are Vicki Plunkett, Pearl Roberts, Joe Cope, and Johnny Brown. We have file cards available for written questions. Vicki, Pearl, Joel, and I will be available for your written questions in the audience. Please turn your cell phones off or on silence as your phone will interfere with the broadcasting of this discussion. Thank you. I would like to recognize Commissioner Joanne Burrell, who is with us this evening, and thank her for attending. Thank you so much. Our moderator this evening is Kim McCoy, Director of the Victims Witness Unit for the Office of the District Attorney. We especially want to thank Kim and our distinguished panel members that Kim will introduce to you. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for being here, and for our viewers who are at home joining us via TV 23. We're excited to be able to present this community awareness panel on the issue of gangs to our community of Cobb County in hopes of educating you more about these issues that we see. As Trish said, I work with the District Attorney's Office Victim Witness Unit, and in that capacity I do work with victims of gang violence, primarily with family members who've lost someone to victims of gang violence, and so I have seen the aftermath of those effects as well. So because we do know that gangs exist in Cobb and that we do have those issues, we hope to educate you about these this evening. So let's take a moment before we begin to get to know who our community panel members are. We're fortunate that we have a broad representation from community members and community activists to police officers to prosecution. Leslie Walker has been a resident of Cobb County since 1988. He's a graduate of Marietta High School, attended Morris Brown College and earned a degree in education, and later, a master's degree in administration supervision. Currently works with Cobb County Parks and Recs and has devoted special attention to the South Cobb community by developing a rapport with various businesses, faith-based and nonprofit groups, and has hosted numerous events to engage the youth of our community. Mr. Walker has a passion for uplifting the next generation with the hopes that they will develop into successful men and women. Thank you, Mr. Walker, for being with us. Sergeant Plunkett is with the Cobb County Police Department and has worked there for 20 years. He's been involved in various aspects with the police department, from uniform patrol to criminal investigations to crimes against children, robbery, homicide, and organized crime and intelligence. He's currently the supervisor of the police department's gang unit, or CAGE as we know it, which stands for Cobb Anti-Gang Enforcement Unit. Thank you, Tim. Sergeant Plunkett, for being with us this evening. Mike Carlson is a Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney with the Cobb Judicial Circuit. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and his Juris Doctorate degree from Washington and Lee University. He's practiced in private practice and as well as in the prosecution field for many, many years. In 2007, Mr. Carlson accepted an appointment as Georgia's first ever dedicated gang prosecutor from then DeKalb District Attorney Gwen Keys Fleming. We are currently very honored that Mr. Carlson is with the Cobb District Attorney's Office, and he was recruited many years ago to write Georgia's anti-gang laws that are currently still on the books today. And with our office here in Cobb, he attributes a lot of time to training and to educating prosecutors in the community at large. He also successfully argued the constitutionality of Georgia's gang prosecution laws to the Georgia Supreme Court. He has also prosecuted roughly 125 defendants to sentence under those laws and donates countless hours of time to prosecutors and law enforcement agencies throughout Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Carlson, for being with us this evening. As I told our panel members before, we thank you for being here, and I don't want you to be nervous because what we're here to do tonight is just educate the community. And so there are no hard questions. We really want to focus on the issue of education and bringing about awareness to our community with this issue. And I want to remind the members in the audience that we have cards. If you'd like to ask some questions through the cards, please feel free to submit those. So the first thing that I want to do is start with some definitions and concepts. And as I said, I think we're fortunate that we have a community perspective, a law enforcement perspective, and a prosecution perspective. So some of the questions might be appropriate for each of you to address in your different roles as your professional roles there. So first and foremost, do we have gangs in Cobb County?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
We're in America, yes.
Okay. And you would be amazed at how many times the general public probably doesn't want to believe that gangs exist in our nice little safe community of Cobb County, but we do know that there's evidence there to the contrary. How do we know that gangs exist in Cobb County from the community perspective? How do you know if a gang exists in your community, Mr. Walker?
Dealing with things like street tags from the gang actually representing their logos, hearing youth talk every day, especially coming out of high school, things like that. You hear a lot of gang fights and things like that happen at basketball games or a football game at different high schools and those rivalries. There's plenty of evidence all around if you pay attention.
Okay. Sergeant?
Yeah, the gangs make it pretty easy. They advertise with the graffiti, as he says, tagging the walls in the community. They want to put their gang name out there. You see the gang type crimes and drive-by shootings, and you see some of the youth that are getting involved in the juvenile justice system. They're wearing specific colors and things like that.
Okay. So there definitely are signs to look for.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Carlson, anything to add to that?
I think we need to take a step back for a second in order to properly address that question and think about the size and scope of criminal gang activity in America first. The most recent comprehensive federal study of the number of gang members, not associates, not hangers-on, gang members in America, came from the 2011 National Gang Threat Assessment. That's a comprehensive study of law enforcement agencies around the country, put together by the Department of Justice, and actually that estimate, according to the report itself, is probably too low. And what that report says is that we have had in 2011, 1.4 million gang members operating in the United States of America. That's more than we have in our active duty military spread out across the world. What's the difference? The objective of the military is not to victimize law-abiding citizens. Now, what area of the country had the highest growth? According to that report, the Southeast was one of the two highest areas. Now, how much of a growth is that 1.4 million represent? Well, 2 years earlier, the National Gang Threat Assessment said there was 1 million gang members. So in just 2 years, that's 400,000 additional gang members. Just think if that's one victim apiece. One more victim apiece. So we're at 500,000. Now, so when you talk about 1.4 million, you talk about a free society like we're fortunate to have in this country where people can go from one place to another. We think of the level of victimization that has occurred. Is there a wall around Cobb County? No. Is there a wall around the state of Georgia? No. And in fact, whether or not there are criminal street gangs in this county, in addition to the evidence that we have here and what we see, there have been years of convictions demonstrated by cases that have gone up on appeal of gang evidence being introduced in trials coming out of Cobb County. So to say that with 1.4 million gang members in an area of the country that is one of the two highest for growth, and by the way, one of the two highest for police reported gang activity. Incidentally, the Southeast is ahead of the region of the country that includes New York, and ahead of the region of the country that includes Chicago in terms of reported gang activity by police agencies in those reports. So to think with all of that, somehow one county in a metro area would be excluded from that would run against the known and demonstrable facts.
Great. Thank you. That's a wealth of information in the first 5 minutes of our panel discussion. So thank you very much. So we've heard a little bit about how we know that there is a gang. What is the definition of a gang? What actually constitutes a gang, and does that differ? I know that it differs from a legal standard, but talk about a community. How do these people consider themselves gangs?
I think most of it is more of a support system, which is pretty typical. My personal definition is any group of kids or adults or people can form a gang that have the same belief, have the same support system, looking for the same things. It's to me the negative content comes in their activity and the actions that they do in our communities.
Sergeant Plunkett, any different perspective from the police community on what constitutes a gang?
We go by the Georgia State Code, which pretty much says that it has to be 3 or more individuals that form a group that is formal or informal in nature, and they have common identifying signs, symbols, or colors, and they engage in criminal gang activity. You have to have the criminal gang activity to go along with everything else to be considered a criminal street gang.
Okay, so that's what the police look for. Mr. Carlson, prosecution-wise, is there any difference?
Both of the definitions we've heard are spot on. And in terms of what we're talking about vis-a-vis what can be prosecuted, and thus it can be prosecuted because somehow the actions are illegal, and they're illegal because they endanger public safety. Exactly what our code says is that it's a group of 3 or more people that are associated in fact and that commit criminal gang activity. And that's what differentiates a criminal street gang, whose activities then become, when they run afoul of the law, prosecutable, from a group of people that, of course, have a constitutional right to gather. And those are just the sorts of issues that made our laws constitutional when our Supreme Court reviewed them.
Great, thank you. So we know that we have gangs. What would make a gang form? What is a community condition that enables a gang to take root in that community?
There are a number of reasons to form a gang. It could start off as family who live on one street, hang out together. It could be friends who hang out together in a certain area who feel threatened by another neighborhood or another family or however that goes. Like I said, to me, it's about having each other's back. You know, give you an example. The police have each other's back in all kinds of different situations, good and bad. And in a gang is pretty much that same camaraderie. You're going to protect your brother. You're going to protect your family. The person that you've struggled with, you're going to protect them. But it's more, like I said, the activities that causes the problems that become when you start becoming prosecuted and things like that to give you the negative connotations.
So I think I hear you saying somebody could join a group for very
You
innocent
can call anything a gang.
reasons. They want to belong. They want to have a certain set of friends.
And now they have to belong, so now they have to listen to that older person who is setting the example and saying, this is what we have to do if you want to be a part of my gang. You want to be a part of this is what you have to do. So.
Okay. Sergeant Plunkett?
I mean, there's a variety of, I guess, at-risk factors that would cause a youth to join a gang. I mean, it could be the neighborhood environment, the school environment, what's happening in the home. But if you go back and look at it, really, a lot of kids grow up in these at-risk environments where they're at a school that has, where the parents have low attachment to the community and so on, or there's broken homes. Most kids that grow up in an environment do not join gangs. There's just a very few that actually join the gang. And what I've seen, just especially working in crimes against children, I've seen some kids that came up where, as juveniles, they were abused. And the next step, they were runaways. And then they went and found people that would support them or have their back, and that was the gang members. And once they join the gang, they're compelled to do some illegal activity, whether it's tagging street corners or participating in armed robberies or a variety of other crimes. They feel like the gang is their family at that point.
Speaking of tagging, that was a audience question. What purpose does tagging serve, and how do you know a tag when you see one?
I can answer let me answer the first part of that question. And I know Sergeant Plunkett will have some follow-up there. One thing to look at what we're talking about when we say tagging, that is gang graffiti. Gang graffiti. And the first way to look at it really sort of at the most distant point is this is the way that gang members communicate messages to law-abiding citizens, to the police, and to other gangs. And the first message that is designed to be conveyed by this sort of propaganda is this area, this neighborhood belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the other gang, it doesn't belong to the police, and it doesn't belong to law-abiding citizens. That's the message that the tagging is designed to express. Some commentators have even called tagging more or less a declaration of war, or at least a statement of conquest or desired conquest. So I think at the macro level, the 100-foot approach on it, that's the way to see it. It's not art. It's not something innocent. It's designed to convey messages, and that's one of the most principal messages about it.
I just wanted to add that as far as tagging is concerned, we separate it into two different types. We have something that we call taggers. These are just individuals acting on their own. Sometimes they act in groups, and they go up and they have a little nickname or some type of artistic type of writing that they will put on multiple locations, and the whole idea is to put their name on as many locations as possible. We don't consider that gang graffiti, and there's really the violence that is attributed to the gangs really doesn't apply in the tagger situation. So we differentiate that from gang graffiti. And like Mr. Carlson said, the gang graffiti, that is, I mean, we call it the newspaper of the streets. That's how they communicate with each other and with the public. And that's the first instance, the first time that we notice that there's gang activity in the community, we see the tagging on the wall. And for the trained investigator or people that are involved with any type of work with the gangs can recognize the gang graffiti, how it differs from the taggers. The gangs will commonly, they're marking their territory, and almost always they start disrespecting the other gang, the rival gang, which if that gang sees it, they come back, tag over that graffiti, and a lot of times that leads to something more serious like a drive-by shooting.
Okay. Mr. Walker, anything to add to that?
They pretty much handled it. It's all about setting, like you said, marking your territory. Sometimes it's just as simple as there's an empty wall and I want to express myself and show commitment to my gang. This is what I did. Look, you guys, look what I did,
Okay. So we've heard that people will join a gang for a variety of reasons. Have you seen a shift in the mentality of what it means to be a gang and of gang activity over the years? Mr. Walker, I'll ask you to answer that one first.
I'm speaking more so from talking to youth who have joined gangs. It's more about belonging to something, saying that you are a part of a gang, and it's almost silly sometimes when you hear their reasoning. It's about protection. It's about having somebody to hang out with, somebody to quote unquote chill with, and it's fun. I'm not going to be doing this forever, but this is what we're going to do in our neighborhood right now, So to me, it's just all silly, though.
Okay.
As far as, we see a variety of, different, what we consider types of gangs. We see some instances where the family has moved from other parts of the country, whether it be Chicago or Los Angeles, and they're kind of just carrying on what they learned there. And I can say the internet and television has played some type of role in influencing how they act as gang members. A lot of times they'll mimic what they've seen in the movies and so forth. We've got our homegrown gangs that are just neighborhood kids that get together, and they start off with relatively simple associations, I guess, and once they cross the line and start getting into the criminal activity, they kind of start showing the same pattern that you would see where the national gangs had developed, where they start looking for their, call it their folklore gets started, where they adopt a color and then they have to adopt hand signs and so on.
Okay. Mr. Carlson?
I think one, we talked about here for a second, the influence of Hollywood, and I want to bring that to the attention of the general public so that we can see when we're talking about criminal street gangs, we're talking about a different set of motivations than Cosa Nostra, the mafia, would have. And they're both criminal organizations. They both have rules that are required, but there's an important difference to remember. The mafia traditionally was about making money. So violence and force was used very sparingly and usually kept in-house because there was a real desire to keep attention from being brought to the activities of the organization. Criminal street gangs are about violence, force, and imposition of will. Those are the things that are the coin of the realm for the gangs. So the behaviors are different. This is why colors are shown. This is why hand signs are there. This is why people walk 8 abreast down the street trying to intimidate. This is why there's gang tagging, marking the neighborhood. And to that point, in terms of what is or isn't more dangerous, realizing that we have, Ms. McCoy, that different culture of gangs, something that is designed to be expressed outwardly in terms of the violence in order to get noticed. You're talking 1.4 million gang members versus Cosa Nostra, the mafia, at its height in America, had only 3,000 to 5,000 members. So think about the amount of criminal attention and damage, which the mafia certainly did at that level of numbers, versus what we know gangs have across the country now.
Okay. I want to follow up on that question. If we convict gang members and send them to prison, does the gang activity and do the gang members continue their association from prison?
Well, actually, that is a place where many gangs started. And we had some history here about how gangs begin. Many gangs have begin within prison systems that people gather for whatever reason to form groups to protect themselves and also to impose their will on other inmates. So the question becomes not will they continue the gang affiliation in prison and after they get out, but what is going to make the public the most safe, recognizing those known facts. And then we start to get to the point of what type of prosecution strategy is going to work best against criminal street gangs, and law enforcement strategy and community strategy. And what we see there is where we can follow the model that was used to dismantle the mafia, and that is having specialized laws that are designed to take the organizations down rather than prosecuting the individual members alone, which gets to the problem of just what your question implies.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard that people congregate and that there are groups and that that's not necessarily a gang because we've talked about street gang activity. But we do know from what you've said that local gangs exist, and then I think pieces maybe of nationally recognized gangs exist. So is there a difference in the mentality with those gangs, and is there a difference in the level of criminal activity that we see from a local gang or a nationally recognized gang?
I think depending on, I think it's really determined on the gang. Each one should be handled separately, differently. Like he was saying, some gangs, all they're doing is tagging. Other gangs, they're setting up plots and waiting for you to leave your house and know your schedule where they can run into your house and take what they need and leave. So it's really the desires of that gang, and specifically, and what they want to do. I don't think it matters if they're national or local. I think because they're a national gang, it might be more well-known, if anything, but I don't think the activity really matters at all. I think it's pretty much almost the same. It's
Okay.
crime, right?
And following up on that, are certain gangs known to be more severe or more violent than others?
I think it depends on the area. I think it depends on the rivalries that's in that area. If you have a Blood and a Crips, I think that's gonna, of course, everybody knows those from years and years and years. But if you go to Pebblebrook High School and you say Y2K this or whatever the name is, and then you go to McEachern and it's, what is it, 2200 or something like that, you mix them together and it's going to be problems, you know. So I think it just depends on the area.
Okay. Sergeant, do you want to follow up on that?
I do. On that first question, talking about the differences between a national gang or a local gang, you know, which one's more violent or would commit the most crimes, you really have to break it down into age. The younger ones, whether they're a member of or claim membership to one of the nationally known gangs that have been around for, you know, since the 1950s or 60s, and then comparing them to a youth that's in one of the local startup gangs, I think the potential for violence is equal with those, just because of the age group and what they have in their mind is the type of criminal activity they need to do to prove themselves, and they really don't have a grasp on you know, the meaning of life. For the most part, they don't value life. Now, when you start looking at the national gangs, you look at those they've been around for a long time, and a lot of people have grown up in those gangs and in different places throughout the United States where, you know, maybe they weren't held accountable for their actions or they were allowed to continue their criminal activity. With those people, you don't, the violence and everything is there, but they try to they've moved more into organized crime, and they get the younger ones to do their dirty work and so on. And as far as, I mean, one gang being more severe than the other, it's like Mr. Walker touched on, that some gangs have specialties. I know one that we worked on, their specialty was burglary. That is what they did. Another case that we just completed, their specialty was trafficking in heroin. They can get into where they focus mainly on one type of crime.
Okay. Mr. Carlson?
Or even, to follow up that question, some gangs even use one sort of weapon. In particular, MS-13 is, which is, according to those same reports, has tens of thousands of members, specializes in homicides with machetes. And that is to some extent because of that particular gang's background and roots in El Salvador, from El Salvador. I think what you'll see across the board with criminal street gangs is there will be sets of expectations and sets of behaviors. How those expectations and behaviors will manifest themselves will depend on not only the gang, but the area the gang is operating in. But those you will ultimately come back to what the epicenter is, to what's really driving it, and that's going to be violence and a desire for notice and respect.
Okay. I took a breath because we have a lot of information that's pretty disturbing for our audience to be listening to, knowing that we have that problem. So let's talk about our children. How early do we see children joining gangs? What's the oldest gang member that you've known of? And particularly with our children, are there warning signs that parents can look to know whether or not their child may be involved in gang activity?
I have seen them as young as 6th grade. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me they were in elementary school. I don't think it'll be that violent, but I do think that there probably are some kind of cliques or groups in elementary, but definitely middle school. I have seen them and witnessed it, where they fight in locker rooms or the bathroom to get initiated and things like that. I missed your next question. What was that?
Are there signs that parents can look for?
I don't think there's any particular signs outside of watching what they're wearing. You know the clothes that you're buying them. If they come in with a new pair of shoes that you know you didn't buy, you know you might want to start asking questions and things like that. Just pay attention to what they're doing, where they are, know where they are. I get a lot of kids at the rec center who basically get dropped off. If they get dropped off, they just walk up to the rec center and they walk home. So there's a lot of time to get into all kinds of trouble, things like that. So just really pay attention and know where your child is.
Okay. Sergeant Pluckett, any distinguishable factors you see?
The youngest one that we've come across that was claiming some type of gang membership was fifth grade. The schools will regularly we go around to the schools and we educate them on the signs and of gang membership. So they routinely will call us when they come across it. I know of 2 occasions where an elementary school has contacted us and had us talk to the parents of a fifth grade child. And what we learn a lot of times is that fifth grader has an older brother that's involved in gang activity, and they're just kind of following in their siblings' footsteps. As far as the oldest gang member, I mean, there's some guys in their 60s that when you start talking more about the outlaw motorcycle gang culture that are in the area. Middle school, we see a good bit in middle school. That's kind of the recruiting ground. The neighborhood's a recruiting ground, and middle school has also become a recruiting ground for the gangs. And high school, definitely more gang activity with the high school kids. As far as what parents can do or to recognize the signs, there's when their child starts skipping school, the grades start plummeting. They're going out and hanging out with their friends, and you don't have any idea who their friends are. And the parents should be very involved in their children's activity. They should know who they're hanging out with. They should be talking to the teachers, making sure that they're going to school and staying on top of their grades. But I mean, the warning signs, like you said, that if they start doodling in their notebooks these weird symbols and numbers, that the parent needs to ask, well, what is that? What does that mean? Or in some cases where the gang has specific colors they identify with, you may have a child that refuses to wear red or refuses to wear blue. I mean,
Lots to keep in mind. Mr. Carlson, anything
I
that
think
you'd like to add?
one thing we've pointed out here, though, is when we should focus on the victims of gang violence in particular, and that's how cases tend to come to us. But if we think about also as the gangs attract and absorb children and youngsters and young adults into their ranks, every new member of the gang, that's a life that's being diverted away from something that could have been wholesome and productive and beneficial society, and then into that milieu of violence and victimizing others that we've spoken of, which again gets back to having community-wide strategies, law enforcement and prosecution, of course, part of that, to take the organizations down and broaden our focus from individual prosecutions and cases.
Okay, thank you. What are the characteristics, and that's a broad term because we've talked a lot about characteristics, but I guess as simple as I can ask it, are there racially specific gangs? We know there are community specific gangs, but would an Asian population mix with a white population? I mean, what are the demographics that we're talking about with
There
gangs?
is no specific type of person that's going to join a gang. You have male gangs, you have female gangs, you have white, black, Mexican. We were just talking about a group from El Salvador who uses a specific weapon. There are so many different categories that you could place yourself in to become a gang, you know what I mean? Everybody could be a victim of falling into in a right or wrong situation, could end up in a gang. And for the smallest reasons, like I said, you have family members who say, we're going to start this gang, and then it turns up into the whole community is in this gang, or this half of the school, or the football players becoming gang members. It could be all kinds of different demographics and everything. So to me, I think it's just a happen of circumstance and the choices you make.
Sergeant Pluckett, do the demographics mix though? Would there be a Asian and a African American and a white person all a member of one gang?
yes, we typically will see that. And you got to look at a neighborhood. If one neighborhood is mostly of one racial makeup, the gang in that neighborhood would be predominantly of that race. But I can't think of any gang in Cobb County where there's not a mixture where, whether they're Asian, white, or African American or Latino, there's, I don't know how to say it, there's not a racially homogeneous gang out there.
Okay. There are several questions about specific types of gangs and gang names, and I don't know that if you're not comfortable talking about that, that's fine. But the two specific questions are how many gangs approximately are known to exist in Cobb County, and are there certain areas in Cobb where gangs are more prominent, and which schools? You can use your discretion in answering those questions.
As far as the number of gangs in Cobb County, we track gang activity, and in the past 4 years, we've documented that I think there's 104 gangs have had some type of involvement in some type of activity in Cobb County. Now, that doesn't mean that the gang is a Cobb County gang. If a gang comes over from Atlanta or a specific area of Atlanta or one of the other surrounding jurisdictions and commits a crime in Cobb County, and we know whether it's the type of crime or they were caught and they admitted their type of membership, we know that they're gang members. We will document that gang has done something in Cobb County. Like if the Cobb County gang comes over here and shoots somebody in Cobb County, does a homicide, we'll document that as a gang activity in Cobb County and attribute to that gang, but that gang may not have any type of presence in Cobb County. So that's where you see a little bit higher numbers because we take those into account.
But we're still impacted by it.
Yes, we are.
And I would argue, he said it was 104
Yes.
gangs identified. I would argue that there's probably another 100 that we don't know about.
Yes.
And based on the national statistics, and based on the intelligence that you get from police all around the state, and based on community programs that we know exist all around the state, I would think that would be a fair assumption that there are more that we don't know about. There are also several questions about. I'm going to throw a lot of concepts at once, and you guys run with them. Okay. So, what if someone joined a gang and then they decided they wanted to get out? Is there a safe process for that? Would law enforcement and prosecution and certainly the community assist with that? Can you ever get out? And what are the safety factors that are involved if someone decided they wanted to willingly leave a gang?
I don't really know. I'm going to say that upfront. I'm not a gang member and never try to get out or anything like that. But my guess is through police, yeah, you probably could be able to get out. Making sure your parents are aware and your family and everybody around you knows that you are leaving that part of your life. I think it's definitely a safe way to do that. And just letting everybody know that you're done with it. Sometimes it's definitely a lot harder when you're dealing with peer pressure and bullying and you're going to be in this for life and all that good stuff. People take things seriously. You can't control the actions of your gang members. You know what they are aware or what they're capable of. But to me, I think it's more of just letting everybody know that you're done and making sure you surround yourself with people who care about you to help you out.
Yes, what we've seen, if a kid joins a gang and they decide they want to get out, they could pretty easily get out of the gang. But there are certain steps they have to take. They got to stop associating with those peers, those delinquent peers. Focus on school and things like that. I mean, we get several requests, especially from parents, where their child has been caught up in juvenile court or has been exhibiting some type of gang behavior, and they'll talk to their kid, and the kid will say, well, I'm forced in to do this. I really don't want to do it. And we'll go talk to the parent and explain to them, and we'll do whatever we can, especially in the cage unit, to describe the dangers of being in the gang and the repercussions, whether when they grow up, if they continue that lifestyle. Mr. Carlson will put them in prison and so on.
I think if I could add, it's a very dangerous thing to leave as well, which gets back to the need to do all we can to eliminate the presence of the organizations from whatever area we're in. Of course, folks, community partners are working very diligently for that here in Cobb County. But we right now, I can't give the details on it because it's a pending case, have a case of multiple drive-by shootings through residential areas right here in Cobb County that were retaliation against someone for leaving a major nationally known gang here in Cobb County. And you not only think about, again, the fact that gang violence has this radiating effect, every single person in those neighborhoods was endangered by that gunfire, which gets back to the extremely disturbing statistic that 50% of the victims of gang shootings are not connected with either or any gang. They're just people who happen to be where the gunfire was. So again, there is hope. There are ways to remove oneself from the gang, but our laws even predict and make it a separate offense to intimidate someone for trying to leave, and that's because that's the way gangs tend to react when someone attempts to leave them, unfortunately.
I just want to add, it does depend on the type of gang it is. The one he's referring to, a national known gang, they may react differently to somebody that wants to leave the gang as opposed to one of the local groups of kids.
And again, when violence is what drives the organization, there are going to be violent demands on loyalty.
And I would think a national gang probably has more structure than a local gang. And so from that, you have the driving force of total allegiance to that gang more so than a local group.
Well, you can't keep 30, 40, 50 or more thousand members in a nationwide organization without exacting some sort of penalty for people trying to leave.
Sure.
And we know they'll do it through any number of means, including murder.
Okay. What do we know about females in gangs? We haven't discussed a specific gender issue. So do we have female gangs? Are they members of other gangs? Do they commingle? Do male and females commingle in gangs? Let's talk about that dynamic.
You definitely have both of those. I've seen some young ladies who have tag buildings. I've seen young ladies who will go fight or jump on another young lady, and some males, they'll jump on just for what they feel is disrespect, or you talk to my boyfriend and now the whole gang is going to come jump on, and I've seen it get a little messy. Just women.
Yeah, well, most of the gangs, especially in Cobb County, are made up of males. There are all-female gangs that we've come across. And we've come across gangs that have full-blooded female members that have equal, I guess, rank as their male counterparts. A lot of times the girls get involved. Their boyfriends are gang members, so they start hanging out in the gang, and the gang will use them to facilitate crimes. Carry their weapons or drugs, and I know in some cases that we had a few years ago, they were using the female in the gang to lure people to an area so the gang members could rob them.
Mr. Carlson?
There's certainly, gangs are dominated by male membership, but there are clearly women that are involved as members and associates of any number of criminal street gangs, and unfortunately, that is just, again, another set of lives on one end that are going to be victimized by the gang members, and of course, lives that are diverted in the wrong directions by the gangs themselves through the members.
Okay. Random questions thrown, so anybody can answer them. If whoever wants to take them can take them. Are there any nonviolent gangs that are a place for individuals to socialize and belong? And how do we steer children in that direction if there are?
Well, that sort of begs the question that we got into on the constitutionality of the statute of our gang prosecution laws in front of the Georgia Supreme Court. If an organization And again, let's go with the legal definition. You know, a group of 3 or more people associated in fact, and we stop there. There's nothing criminal about it, and and their activities are legal, and there's nothing criminal about it, and they're all over the place in all sorts of organizations.
That's more of a club.
It's a club, it's a gang, and we know what they are, but then when that threshold gets crossed into the group committing criminal gang activity, then of course now we're talking about something that's criminalized. So it's really more watching what the group does and doesn't do in order to make sure that it's being differentiated. But I mean, it could be car clubs, there could be, any number of organizations, again, that everyone knows very well here in the audience. That would be a perfectly legitimate way to exercise the constitutional right to free association.
And I think that also goes on to parents too, is to expose their children to those experiences where they can do a gardening, for example. We have with the generational gap where you have some grandparents who can come down and teach their children in the community how to pack vegetables and keep them so they last longer and things like that. There's always the sports, there's the cheerleading, there's a whole department in Cobb County government called Parks and Recreation where they can get involved in all kinds of activities. And once you join those activities with other kids and people your age, that you can form a gang and do positive things and give back and things like that. So.
Okay. I want to tag along that with you, okay? Because I know your focus is in South Cobb, and we tend to divide up our county into South, Northeast, Middle, West Cobb. Do other programs exist throughout our county like what you're doing in the South Cobb community?
All over.
Okay.
All over county.
Tell us a little bit about those.
I'm going to say 4-H Club is another group in Cobb County as part of the government. They are all over the county. They partner with Keep Cobb Beautiful and do different things in the community. Every recreation center offers programs, classes from karate to boxing to the arts as far as dancing, acting. Some recreation centers offer instruments and music. There's plenty of things we could do all through the county.
Okay, thank you. We've talked about some breeding grounds. We've talked about recruiting areas from communities to families to neighborhoods. Are we talking about a low-income issue here with gang activity?
No.
You would agree?
I would agree with that.
Okay. So we do have gangs in the more affluent areas of
Definitely.
our community. Do they act like the other? Is there a difference in the way they act? Is there a difference in the way they congregate?
Yeah, when you talk about, give you an example, bullying. If and I keep saying sports teams, and I don't want to get away from that, but if you have a group of males or females who want to bully a young person or somebody who tends to hang by themselves and things like that, that one gang is bullying to me, which is a crime. That younger person, and I think anybody could be a victim of that if you get caught in a bathroom. I remember in Marietta High School, we used to, after PE, if it was a problem with a gang or you got into one person and a gang member, then you were fighting in the locker room just to protect yourself. Sometimes that got reported, sometimes it didn't. But I think it doesn't matter what area you're in. I think it happens in all high schools. I think it happens in most middle schools where you are in a situation where you have a choice. Am I going to join this group that is doing this activity, or am I going to go and join this other group who's doing something that I feel more comfortable with? It's just a matter of circumstance.
Okay. Sergeant or Mr. Carlson, anything to add to
Well,
that?
I think too, we don't want to examine criminal street gangs as if they're tied by some cord to stay within a 1 mile radius of where anybody in them lives. We have seen in any community that's representative in the country, this one included, you'll find criminal street gang members from other countries. You'll find them from other parts of this country committing crimes. So where are the gang members going to go to sell drugs? Anywhere they think they're going to be able to sell drugs. And let's not forget, again, according to those reports, Number one across the country, street-level drug distributors are criminal street gangs, and the types of areas of the highest growth of criminal street gang crime and activity are rural and suburban. Where's the money? So if they're looking to go sell the drugs, they're going to go to where they can sell drugs. If they're looking to go burglarize, commit armed robberies, all of which are crimes that are often tied with just initiation, where are they going to go? And again, they're going to go to where they think they can make money on it. So that will probably mean not in their own blighted neighborhoods, if that's where they are, but into some other location. And then, of course, will folks in affluent areas congregate, form gangs? Certainly. There was actually a famous case involving a very famous Hollywood actor's son, where he was in a gang in California known as Malibu Locals Only. Of course, Malibu being a very rich part of the Los Angeles area. But again, the gangs are not going to stay of necessity within a mile or a few blocks of their houses to commit their crimes. We know they not only go across this country, they come here from other countries to do so.
They go where it's most advantageous for them to be.
Well, exactly. And the pattern was going back about 20 years ago, where major metropolitan area policing became more and more effective at frustrating the activities of criminal street gangs. They moved into other areas. So let's say Washington, D.C. area criminal street gangs moved to Richmond, Virginia, where they had the market for the drugs. They had a large population of hundreds of thousands of people, but there wasn't the same sophistication on the part of law enforcement in terms of slowing them down. Now, interestingly, talking about that part of Virginia, any number of gangs there choose to go and commit many of their execution-style murders in the Shenandoah Valley, again, because of the perception they won't get caught in there, back where I went to law school.
Let me add to that. A lot of the gangs will be prevalent in a certain neighborhood where they can get away with their crimes. If there's a lot of other criminal activity that draws the resources of law enforcement, the gang member is more apt to get away with their crimes, whether it be selling drugs or dealing in stealing cars, burglaries, and so on. If you're able to focus on the criminal activity and focus on the gangs like we're trying to do with the DA's office now in certain areas, you can actually push that gang out of that area, and it'll move somewhere, maybe in another jurisdiction completely, where they will continue to operate under the radar of law enforcement.
Okay. With the gang mentality, I guess the community of the gang itself, is there usually a dominant leader in a gang? And if that specific leader is taken out, would the gang cease to exist?
No, somebody else will just step up and do it.
Okay.
A lot of times when you talk about who's in charge, it's about the power, it's about who's making the most money, things like that. So when one person gets arrested or murdered or whatever it may be, somebody else is going to be there to step up. A lot of times, even something small as you have somebody who set up shop in front of a store and is secretly selling drugs to people as they walk in and out of a store. You arrest that person and you catch them, got them on video and everything, and 2 days later it's going to be somebody else doing the same thing. It's just another opportunity for somebody to step up and do it.
I think it depends on the structure of the gang. Your more traditionals that have gangs that have rank, where there is, I guess, a vice president, and there's a line of succession, where if the leader is moved off, there's a vote and stuff like that. As your more organized traditional gangs, and your local neighborhood gangs, usually the leader in that case is probably the best fighter, the bully. In some cases, you've got people that are very charismatic, and everybody looks up to them. They become the leader of the gang. They may not be the best fighter in the gang, but people look up to them. But I can tell you that traditionally, if you put that leader in jail, or if something happens to that leader, somebody will rise up and take that position.
Okay. Mr. Carlson, I want to pick your brain for just a minute because you're a wealth of information that most of us probably won't ever read. We just depend on people like you to tell us the information. We know that gangs have always existed. Do we know more about them today than we did 20 years ago? And what more do we know about them to help our communities and law enforcement and prosecution better combat the gang issue?
We absolutely know them better, and we know them better for a number of reasons. One is the growing effectiveness at the state and local level, in particular, federal as well, of specialized gang prosecution units and specialized gang investigative units, and their efforts not only on the streets and in the courtrooms, but also in the community, working with people like Mr. Walker, and that what has been developed are comprehensive community plans to deal with the gang issues. Now, and we see Captain Ellis here from the police department, and it's great to see him from folks like him and others that work so hard, like Sergeant Plunkett and folks from so many departments here do and across the country, have been able to learn more about gangs and how they operate. And what does that mean over that time? That means we've learned more effective strategies to protect communities from them. You know, where are we lagging in all of that? It's because for years and years and years, prosecutions were always focused at the one individual. And now let me draw from the experience from the mafia. There was not a single successful mafia prosecution in this country before 1970. Why is that? Because there was no law designed to get jurors the information about the criminal organization until the racketeering laws were written, which was in 1970. Now, we did not have a really functioning anti-gang law in Georgia until 2006 or 2007 when our current one was passed. So think of the amount of time the gangs were able to operate without law enforcement and prosecution being able to focus like that. We still don't have a federal gang prosecution law for adult offenders. There isn't one. So the question about the specialized investigation and the specialized prosecution falls to local law enforcement that still has to fight many battles in terms of getting the information out as far as the gangs. So we've certainly learned a lot over, say, the last 20 years about how gangs operate, and that's because individuals and groups in many states have pushed the issue hard enough for public safety reasons to be able to get community backing behind specialized prosecution units, specialized investigative units, and to make sure we have specialized laws to attack this, what our legislature has called a crisis in this state.
And so we should be thankful that we live in the community of Cobb County that we do, that we have a district attorney who is committed to this issue and a chief of police who is committed to this issue and a board of commissioners through our community programs as well as our police and prosecution committed to this issue as well. So thank you to those people for your dedication to this. I have a question here that I'm going to ask, and I'm going to direct it to Sergeant Plunkett, and you tell us how you're going to handle this one. Okay? What are the names of gangs here in Cobb County?
We get asked this question a lot. A lot of it comes from the media. They want to publish it in a paper. I have a personal policy that I do not want to advertise for these gangs whatsoever. A lot of times, when you see incidents happen, the names come out during those incidents, and so it's documented that this gang did this. But I don't want to advertise for them. And one of the reasons, I don't want. In the past, someone has said, can you give us the 10 worst gangs? Start with number one. What is the worst gang in the county? I am not going to give you what my view of the worst gang in the county is, because number two may decide, well, I want to be the worst gang in the county, and they'll go out and do something horrendous. Mm-hmm. So I just have that policy. I don't want to advertise for them.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, and again, wanting to stay with that policy generally, the gangs that we know of from LA, the gangs that we know of from New York, the gangs that we know of from Chicago are here.
Yes.
and they've been prosecuted and investigated here. And in addition to those gangs, who nationally, again, number some of them in the tens of thousands, that have been Cobb County crimes involving some of those gangs have been featured on the History Channel on the program Gangland. In addition to those gangs, we have the hybrid gangs, the gangs of local origins, which again could become absorbed into and thus become a conduit for those larger gangs to operate even more here, or could develop into those larger, what we call traditional gangs in the process. So without naming any particular series, I won't say one, the gangs that make those the crime in those communities what we know them to be are here. They're not here to the same extent. And again, we've got tremendous efforts from Mr. Reynolds and our district attorney and others across the gamut, law enforcement, community partners working very hard to combat them and doing so successfully. But they're here. And again, those numbers in a free society that we live in become overwhelming when we think about nationally and the dangers everyone faces.
Right. Thank you. And so about those dangers, I've worked with victims in gang cases, those who are the result of the different types of criminal activity that we've talked about today. And I know there's a certain level of fear even in when we work in those settings in the courtroom when we're surrounded by deputies. If you don't mind me asking, and you can certainly pass on answering the question if you would like, have you ever been afraid working in this situation? And if so, how do you keep yourself and your family safe?
I have been threatened at South Cobb Recreation Center. My car has been threatened at South Cobb Recreation Center. Would I say fearful? No. Concerned? Yes. I do report that to my friends at Cobb County Police, just to say, hey, just in case somebody said X, Y, Z. It's definitely something that you don't take lightly, but at the same time, I'm not going to walk on eggshells either.
Okay.
As far as fearful, no. Like you said.
Well, you carry a gun.
Correct. And
I can't.
concerned, yes, absolutely. I think anybody that's been in law enforcement for long enough and dealt with some serious criminals has had their lives threatened or statements made that they will come and harm their family and so on. It kind of comes along with the job, but just like everybody else, you just need to be cautious and be aware of your surroundings and do those type of things.
Sure.
In specific, I have had to have guards before because of certain gang members or gang leaders that I prosecuted successfully. I remember after one trial, I had police cars at both entrances to my neighborhood and one outside my house for 2 weeks after the trial. My daughter, who was very young at the time, she was probably 4 or 5, thought it was just great. Daddy's friends were here every day. Isn't that great? Daddy's friends are here. That's always a concern when someone who's in the prosecutor's position, where you can sometimes become a constant in a particular gang or a particular gang member or group of gang members' life, or in my situation, a constant in any number of gangs' lives, because the cases, the bond hearings, the number of jurisdictions that I've worked in have come to me. But at the same time, while those are concerns, and I'll tell you, folks in law enforcement have always been extremely diligent to warn me, to let me know there are places I probably shouldn't go anymore. You shouldn't go to that gym. That's not a good area for you. Take a different route home from now on, the way it's been. At the same time, I'm not, as a prosecutor, in the same position that the folks in law enforcement are every day dealing with it. I'm also not in the same position that the people in the neighborhoods that are really set upon by these gangs are dealing with. And speaking only for myself, it was a decision made years ago that when I started being assigned these cases, that consistent with what Mr. Reynolds' position is now, and mine has always been. I've taken on these cases, and I owe it to the men and women of law enforcement. I owe it to the victims, and I owe it to the people in those neighborhoods to deal with those inconveniences and whatever dangers there might be to try to bring some peace to all of them.
Thank you. So we have, want to remind the audience, probably going to be wrapping up questions pretty soon. So if you have any last minute questions, please get those to us. We've answered a lot of questions and learned a lot about this issue here in our community and throughout the state and throughout the nation. One of the things we don't ever want to do is leave people without resources. So if you can talk about from your individual professions and perspectives, what you're doing more than what you've talked about already, if there's anything additional, and just what you would say from your professional perspective about the issue.
Want me to start? The first thing I would say is communication. If you identify somebody as a gang member or committing or about to commit any kind of crime, I think it's important to sit down and talk to them and get their mentality or their reasoning behind their actions. When I first got to South Cobb Recreation Center back in 2009, there was a number of taggings and fighting from everybody, from girls fighting to the males tagging the back of the building. You have kids running from police through the building. It was just a mess. And that has dropped dramatically because I have been committed to saying, you know what, don't bring that down here into this recreation center. Don't bring this down to the complex. If you're going to do that, you can go get caught on Six Flags Drive, and they'll give you a free ride to county services. And opening up that dialogue and being real with them and open with them gives them a different mindset of, yeah, okay, we're in this gang, but we don't necessarily have to break a law. We can represent each other and hang out, play basketball, and have fun right here. And we don't have anybody judging us or standing on top of us telling what we should be doing and what colors we can't wear. I invite them in. As long as you follow the rules, there's no problem, and they respect me for that. And so that dropped a lot of the mess that was going on down there.
Excellent. Thank you.
As far as prevention, gang violence and gang membership starts in the home. Is the parents really do need to be aware of the kids and what they're getting into and who they're hanging out with. And as far as law enforcement, I mean, our job is to enforce the laws. Typically, you won't see the gang unit getting involved until there's been some type of crime has been committed. There are occasions dealing with the younger kids, or we're made aware either they're involved in some petty crimes, or we're made aware that they have joined a gang or are thinking about joining a gang. We'll go talk to that parent, talk to that kid, and remind them of the repercussions that they might be either in a grave or spending the rest of their life in prison. So as predominantly as law enforcement, when we get involved, we put them into the judicial system, and then it's up to Mr. Carlson to take it from there.
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind here is we have tremendous resources here in Cobb County and a lot of very dedicated folks that are aiming tremendous efforts, those within the government and those who are kind enough and generous enough to volunteer their time for it. And that's very important. And when we start thinking about how, when cases are made and have to be made, ultimately what is going to scare the gang members and scare the gangs are stacks of paper called indictments that bring them to court and cause them to be responsible for what they've done to the community at large. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that every single person who's been involved in any sort of gang activity needs to or ought to go to prison forever. And one thing that our gang laws do is they give us tremendous flexibility in sentencing, from taking the people who have committed egregious crimes and helping us to get in a position where we can hold them fully accountable and make the community safe from them, but also someone who might have just come up with a brush against the gang activity and maybe would benefit from a second chance. Gives us the ability to give them a sentence that might be probated, that might be able to set them right. So I think when we look at the big picture here, it's going to require a total community commitment, which I think we really have, and I'm confident about in Cobb County, to be flexible and find a cascade of approaches to make this county as safe as it really can be and will continue to be in the future.
Thank you. And from also about your agency, if someone wanted to learn more about your agency or your efforts in prevention and education with gang activities, where do they find that information?
You can go to the Cobb County website under Parks and Recreation. We advertise all our programs at all the recreation centers. We even do countywide events, and we partner with the Drug Alcohol Task Force and every other agency in the county that's looking to do something to improve the quality of life of everybody.
As far as the cage unit, typically we'll go out and community organizations, homeowners associations, the schools. I think we've been to just about every school and done some type of presentation. And a lot of times the schools will invite the parents of the kids to come and sit in on these presentations where we talk about gang prevention and recognizing the gang activity and the signs, the symbols, and everything they need to be aware of.
District Attorney's Office has an outstanding website, and of course, people for more information can come to our Public Information Officer, Kim Azaza.
And is there a national gang prevention website? Is that the right word?
Yes, there are several like that. For the statistics we've talked about, the National Gang Threat Assessment, and then also there's the National Youth Gang Survey for additional. All of that's through the Department of Justice.
Great. Thank you. So I would like to thank each of the panel members for being with us this evening and sharing your expertise and information with us. I'd like to give you one more chance. If there's anything you would like to say to the audience that you haven't had an opportunity to share, this is your moment to do that. Mr. Walker?
I don't have a whole lot to say except for pay attention to your children, try to stop the conditioning that leads them to negative activities. Don't look at all groups as negative. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Sergeant?
Just going back to your first question, yes, there are gangs in Cobb County, and we need to take it seriously. I hear so many times, or especially in the past 10 years, that we don't have real gangs. Only real gangs exist in Los Angeles and Chicago. No, those gangs exist here. We do need to focus on the kids. The young ones, or you can still save them, get them out of that atmosphere. And as far as the older ones, the ones that have established themselves as gang members, we need to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law and hopefully remove them from committing violent acts against the community.
Okay. Mr. Carlson?
This is the most significant threat to public safety in the country, and really one America has never faced or come to grips with as it should. That makes it the most significant public safety issue in any location in the country because of that. And I believe that forums like this one and the kind of efforts that are being put forward in Cobb County are going to be exactly what this community needs to be able to contend with that threat, criminal street gangs.
Thank you. So once again, we're reminded how fortunate we are to live, work, and play in the community of Cobb County. Thank you for your expertise in being here and for your time and commitment to being here this evening. Thank you for allowing me to be your panel moderator this evening. I always enjoy learning about the different aspects that we present to the community. Thank you to the Board of Commissioners for your support of these activities. I know you're going to say that, Trish, but I wanted to say it as well. And to the Neighborhood Safety Commission for sponsoring our event. I'm going to turn it back over to Trish to let us out with some Neighborhood Safety Commission information and what we have to look forward to in the future.
Thank you, Kim, very much. Thank you for attending and watching on Channel 23 this evening. We especially want to thank our dynamic panel and members and our moderator. We are honored to have you as our moderator and our panel members this evening. Our community is very fortunate to have each of you supporting, advising, counseling, and educating the community concerning gang activity. A special thank you to Cornelius for broadcasting this discussion on Channel 23. Please join us Wednesday, October the 15th, when our topic will be active shooter. This discussion will be at 7 o'clock in this room as well. Thank you again for attending this evening, and good night.